this session we'll talk about the Local Community Development Committee, often known as the LCDC, nothing to do with the rock band. The LCDC is a very important structure in your local community. Earlier at another session we spoke about the Public Participation Network and how representatives of the organisations that are working in communities, not for profit, are involved in various different committees. So what is the LCDC? The LCDC is a very interesting and very participative group. Let's say, for example, that that's the LCDC table. Who's sitting at it? There are representatives of the local authority, and usually the LCDC can be chaired or can be, if you like, overseen by a representative from the local authority called the Chief Officer. They make sure that the LCDC meets, they make sure that it's like a chairperson basically. Then we also have, at another stage, we also have local elected representatives. And there can be 5, even 6 of these. Each one of them, usually, is a chair of an SPC. That's the Strategic Policy Committee that we spoke about at a previous session. The Strategic Policy Committee deals with particular things like housing or employment or enterprise or whatever. So they are, so they would have the chairs of SPCs, and also you would have plus local representatives that are not chairs. There are so many seats usually per LCDC for local representatives. Then we would also have community and voluntary representatives. Now, these are inclusive of, there is a program, European program called the LEADER program in most rural areas. So you would have the LEADER program represented there, usually by the CEO of the LEADER company. You would also have usually the SICAP coordinator or manager. And SICAP is the Social Inclusion Community Activation Program. This is also run at a very local level and funded by the LCDC. So it's very important that the manager of SICAP program is actually there. Then, along with that, you've got representatives from the community who are from the PPN, the Public Participation Network that we spoke about in a previous session. Public Participation Network, their coordinator sits there, as well as distinct elected representatives who are not the same people who are elected to represent PPN and SPCs or on other linkage groups or whatever. They are specifically elected to come to the LCDC. So there would be somebody there from the Social Inclusion College, someone there from the Environment College, and someone there from the Community and Voluntary College. They are representatives of the PPN, and they come there with a mandate from the plenary, which is the gathering of all of the PPNs. So they have, if you like, an action plan. They have things to talk about when they get there, and they must also feed back to the PPN when they're there on what has gone on. And the coordinator supports these reps, but also comes with his or her own pieces of work to do. There are also representatives of public bodies in the county. Those public bodies have a local, what they call a local development function. So in other words, the local Department of Social Protection, the HSE, the Education and Training Board, and others. For example, in coastal areas, you might have the Department of Fisheries, if they have a local representative. So that, if you like, those seats are for public bodies with a local development function. You also have other groups, such as representatives from youth work. You have representatives from maybe the drug task force. And other such agencies locally who are doing particular work with particular groups of people. You may well have you've got the youth work, the drug task forces, etc., and then you may well have the traveller integration worker. You may well have refugee integration worker. And many other reps around that table from all different kinds of work. For example, another example or two would be the sports partnership. In some cases, in some counties, they also have a mirror of what the old public, if you like, the public partnership used to be. Public partnership process had various different members, like for example, they had IBEC for employers, they had the ICMSA and the IFA farmers, they had unions, trade unions. Those seats are still available to people if they need to use them or want to use them in a local community. You also have you would also have various different other organizations coming here, maybe the GAA in some places if it's very strong. So you might ask, with all of these various different organizations, and by the way, this isn't a complete overview or an exhaustive, don't say, oh, that in every county IBEC is sitting there, or employers or enterprise, whatever. Different counties and different cities have different priorities, and they have to have various different expertise at their table. But this is more or less an overview of the kinds of groups that are actually there. Now, some of them are enshrined in the legislation. So basically there has to be space for the local elected reps. There has to be community and voluntary representation, etc. But generally there's also scope to bring other people in. And if they can't be sitting at that table, there are numerous subcommittees out here that people can be involved in, and then they bring those issues to the table. They're often chaired, for example, by various either elected reps, the PPN coordinator, for example, the traveller integration worker, and so on. So different people are getting their things onto the table. So you might wonder why. Why so many people are sitting around the table at the same time. They meet monthly usually, and you'll say, how can you get this work done? They get this work done because every 5 years the LCDC creates the local economic and community development plan, the LECP. And that is, if you like, one chapter in the overall county development plan. Because the LCDC has one job, which is really important. The LCDC is the only place in the local area, in the whole county or in the whole city, where all of those players actually sit around the table together. An awful lot of the time, for example, public bodies, the Department of Social Protection and, for example, the Education and Training Boards, they may work with each other, possibly at times, but this is the only place they sit side by side at committees. And this is the place where things, for example, come up on that table which have a piece of work for each person at the table. For the first time in years, it meant that, for example, the sports partnership could actually interact with an action that the Department of Social Protection was progressing, and could actually say, well, if we had funding to do that, we could do it, you know. And they might come in and they might say, one of them might come and say, we need to, for example, reach out to long-term unemployed women and we don't know how to do it. And there could be, well, people here in the LEADER or the CICAP program who say, we actually have a fund for that, we actually have an action for that. And so sometimes these actions are progressed at this table and sometimes they're taken from the table and worked at outside and brought back in. So it's can be a very interactive and a very promising and opportunistic place to be. This is why it's very important that our members, DFI members for example, are involved with their public participation network and become involved as representatives on either as part of the Social Inclusion College, which most of the DFI organisations will be joining, because that is the aim, social inclusion of people with disabilities. And if you're part of this process, you will not only be able to engage in these discussions, but also you will be able to be part of the decisions that are being made about your life. Because the difference between this and the previous group that was there up until 2014 is this group has money. In the past, before 2014, the LEADER programme here received its money directly from the government, as did the previous programme that was there for the CICAP programme. Those programmes are really on the ground rural development and community development programmes. They're there for various target groups. They're there for the unemployed. They're there for people with disabilities, to include people with disabilities. They're there for women's work. They're there for lone parents. They're there for about 14 different, could be up to 14 different target groups. People who live in our communities that we know every day, that we work with on the ground. Now, that money doesn't come that way anymore. That money comes from Hubble to the LCDC. And the LCDC decides where that money goes. So LEADER has to do reports and comes in here and tells the LCDC what it's doing. It needs approval. And CICAP, the same. And there are committees, for example, there's a review committee, an evaluation committee, a subgroup that PPN reps are on, outside of the LCDC. So, in other words, now the money is coming to the LCDC. And they're making much more decisions around the monies that are coming into the county. For example, the money for the sports partnership comes through there. The money for many of these other programs comes through there. The idea behind this LCDC was to have one place in the county or the city where all community, all enterprise and economic plans were being made. And so it made sense that the money coming in to the various different groups at one point where nobody could actually ask them how much money are you getting or where is it coming from and so on and so forth, and nobody had to tell. They didn't have to work with anybody about it very much. They are now coming to one place where they can talk about it, how the money is being spent, on what programs they're being spent on, they're being approved, and there's a greater accountability for everybody, and everybody really likes it that way in lots of ways. The other group, which I think is really important to put in here too, is the age-friendly program. There's an age-friendly coordinator, and they have a program. All of these, the traveller integration, the refugee integration, the age-friendly, they're all working to a strategy, either at national level or locally. So a strategy is created around how, for example, there's an age-friendly strategy. the age-friendly coordinator works through that age-friendly strategy and reports on it in here. The same thing with the travellers. So imagine you're at this meeting, and if something came up, for example, which related to the travelling community through an SPC, it's likely that the traveller integration worker will be on that SPC in that seat, and there will be community reps there. Supposing that is fed back in to the LCDC, the traveller integration worker will be able to also feed in the traveller perspective on that. And if, for example, they said, well, do you know what, it'd be really good if we could engage young traveller men in activities. Say, for example, they're really into their horses and they love their racing, the sulky racing and so on and so forth. Somebody from, for example, sport partnerships would come in and say, we'd like to engage with those young men in our program. We have a program for young men, and we could actually customize a program to work with them and to make it more accessible for them to be involved in. So it's a place where opportunities can arise. It's a place where issues can be looked at together, collectively. And it's also a place where, as I said, additional funding can be looked into and maybe approved.